As an alternative to levels for color and tonal adjustment, you can also use curves. It really is a matter of personal preference. Arguably, curves gives you a bit more control. I'd like to show you how we can go from this to this using a couple of simple curves adjustments. I'll throw away the ones that we already have. To start with, I'm just going to add a brightening curve. But before I do that, here's how they work. So we see we have a grid. If I hold down my Option or Alt key, I can click on that grid to switch it from a 4x4 to a 10x10. Behind the curve itself, which starts out as a diagonal, referred to as a linear curve, we have the shape of the histogram. And that will change according to how you modify the curve. If you're working with an RGB image, which I am, you can drag the curve up, and I'm dragging from the midtone area to add light, or you can drag down to remove light. If this were a CMYK or a grayscale image, the opposite would be true. If you dragged up, that would increase the amount of ink and consequently darken the image. If you drag down, that would decrease the amount of ink. If you want to put the curve back to how it was, you can just drag that point off. There are a number of presets that we have. If you choose strong contrast, this gives you what's referred to as an S-curve, where the curve is pulled up at the top right in the highlight areas, making the highlights brighter, and pulled down in the shadow area, making the shadows darker. Let's just return that to the default. Now you can have multiple points on your curve, and what some people prefer to do is tease out information from different tonal regions by using multiple points. Personally, I find that way too difficult on the one hand and far too prone to error on the other. So what I like to do is combine my curves with masks. In this first curve, I would like to introduce more light around the eye. Unlike levels, we have a targeted adjustment tool. I can click on that hand and then move over the area of the image that I wish to affect. As I do so, you'll see a bouncing ball appear on the curve. That indicates the tonal region that is beneath my cursor. So I'm going to click there and then drag up to add more light. Rather than try and tame the curve by adding in stabilizing points at the top, which as you can see is prone to some rather nasty results, I'm going to accept it like this, but then come to the layer mask, which I will fill with black. I glance over at my foreground background colors. I see that currently black is my background color. So I'll use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control and the backspace delete key. If it were my foreground color, I would use Option or Alt and the backspace delete key. So now my mask is completely black and we don't see any of that curve adjusting the image beneath. I'll choose my brush tool, make sure that I'm clicked onto the layer mask, set my opacity, in this case to 100%, adjust the size of my brush if necessary, left square bracket smaller, right square bracket bigger, and then just paint over the image where I want to reveal the adjustment. Next, I'm going to make a selection of the subject. I actually want to apply a curve to everything but the subject. So I will come to the select menu and inverse that selection. Then come and choose a curves adjustment. And in this case, I want to darken the background and the sky, so we draw attention to the subject. I'm just going to drag the curve down from the midpoint. Let's say that I go a little bit too far, as I have here. I can always come to any of these adjustments and tame them by reducing their opacity. Another use of curves is to perform a color correction or color balance. This can also be done in levels. We have our black point and our white point. We also have our gray point. And if I click on the image with the gray point dropper, I balance the colors at that point. I'll take my gray point dropper and then click on the image at what I think should be a neutral midtone. You might find it helpful to open the info panel so that as you mouse around on the image, you can take note of the RGB numbers. The story that these numbers tell us is pretty much wherever we go, hovering over the snow, we see that the blue value is significantly greater than the red and the green, indicating that this image has a slight blue color cast. So if I click at this point, the color numbers become the same or within 1 or 2 digits of each other, and the color cast is neutralized. You can see how that has affected the curve, with the blue curve being dragged down and the red and the green slightly raised up.